us, yeah. Mark, Carl, Tony, friends popping up here. Meetings being live streamed. It sounds like it's linked up. Woody, is it working? Carl, Mark, getting everybody together here. It's gonna be a big Q&A session today. We'll do a couple quick announcements, and then it's gonna just be a lot of questions.
Mostly Nikon questions.
Yeah, there's a few. We got a couple. We got a Sony question or two, right?
One Sony question.
All right. Well,
it's all Nikon.
Live.
Live?
we're live. Lots of good folks. There's Charlie's popped up. Weird to see you in Port Orford when I saw you here yesterday morning. And using, oh, Charlie's muted. That I've been using that that kitchen knife. It's amazing. That thing is so sharp.
We are live, guys. Good to
Yes,
go.
it would be yours, Rob.
All right.
And the short answer is not as good as Nikon, sadly.
Well, yeah, but maybe the next gen. All right, everybody. So welcome to the office hours. I think we're live on YouTube. We're live here on Zoom.
We're live here.
We're live here. I got Rick here with me, which is awesome. He's actually spending the week, and we're kind of gearing up, doing a bunch of stuff and kind of getting prepped for our workshops in Joshua Tree and Death Valley, which are happening
34 days from now.
Woo-hoo! It's gonna be fun. So, and also, you know, we thought we'd squeeze in one more office hours before we take off on that trip. So what was our date? The 15th? The
15th?
Yeah, Tuesday the 15th. We'll do an office hour. And we thought, we haven't looked at everybody's images for a little while. And we're kind of, we've taken a break from doing the on-one photo critiques every month that we've been doing for years. So we thought maybe have everybody submit one winter photograph. We'll put a gallery up on the office hours sign up page. If you go over to hudsonhenry.com/office hours, Woody can speak to when that's going to happen. But you can upload a single image, you know, 2,500 megapixels on the long edge.
2,500 pixels.
Oh, 2,500 pixels, not megapixels. Good God. 2,500 pixels on the long edge, JPEG.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, right. Named with your name. You know, it's just a single image. That way we know whose is whose. So export that as your name, that size, upload it. We'll go through them as a group and just look at stuff and see what everybody sees and talk about images. It's always fun. All right. So any other announcement? Woody, when do you think you'll have the gallery able to go?
I think we'll have it up by either end of the day today or tomorrow.
Okay, cool. So just check back, hudsonarea.com/office hours like you got here. And any other announcements that we need to?
I don't think so.
No.
I
Okay.
don't think so.
All right. We've got, I think all of our workshops are full except for the last two in the fall, the Tetons and Yellowstone.
Yep.
So there's still some slots open there. We still have waiting lists for all the others. So those are filling pretty quick too. If anybody's interested, you know, holler at us about that. So Woody, you got anything to put out?
Nope. Good.
All right. David Archer wanted to be here today, but there's he had an appointment he had to run to with his wife. And so I talked to him a fair bit yesterday about his impressions of the Z9. And I can share a few of those because I know a lot of people are Z9 curious. He thinks it's better at tracking action than his D5. And he loves the fact that he can flip to APS-C mode and still have a few more megapixels than the Z9, than the D5 in FX mode. He agrees with me about a few quirks and isn't very happy about some of the changes to bracketing and a few other things. But as far as an action camera goes, it's kind of his dream camera and he loves the way it fits his hand and he adores it. So I'm probably going to have a conversation with him about that later today that we'll put in the approaching the scene for this week. And I'm hoping to have the full setup guide for that camera to launch at the end of this week too. So, and it might come in several videos because it's a big complicated camera and I may do kind of a separate video for each settings bank that I'm going to have you program. All right.
So we have a lot of questions about the Z9.
Yeah.
And a lot of questions about the 100 to 400.
Yeah. That makes sense.
How do you want to start about this?
I think we should answer Rob's Sony question first. So
Rob's Sony question.
yeah.
You're going to make all these Nikon people wait.
Well, yeah, otherwise Rob's going to have to wait through a lot of Sony stuff, which he might do anyway, but.
All right. One of the things that if you've watched the approaching the scene stuff, the Nikon, the Z6 and the Z7 do a great job at sort of low light focusing.
Mhm.
You know, on my Z6, I can literally aim up at the stars at blue hour,
Mhm.
you know, while there's still only a few stars out there. Can aim up at the stars and literally zoom in and autofocus on a star.
Mhm.
The Sony's not as good at that. I do the exact same thing. I zoom in, I go to 200% or 300%, and autofocus is limited. A big star, I can autofocus on it. But mostly I just manually focus.
And that's the A1.
That's well, and it was with the A7R III too.
Yeah.
You know, it does a good job. It just autofocus in low light is not as good as the Z.
Yeah. And the Z's, if you have a planet on a moonless night in pitch black, I have no problem using that pinpoint autofocus and activating low light focus on the original Z line and nailing focus on a planet in the dark of night. Now, I was down in Baja, and only at the end of the trip, I got a couple of moonless early periods in the night. It was pretty bright. We had a full moon when I first got there with the Z9. And I turned on that crazy starlight mode that it has. It doesn't have low light focus. It has a thing called starlight mode. And I got a couple of questions about, you know, does the viewfinder really look this busy and noisy all the time at night? Well, it does look busy and noisy if you activate starlight mode. It's an on-off thing. You can put it in your My menu. And it does look noisy, but it gives you a few extra stops of crazy low light viewing where you can kind of frame things up in pitch black. You can actually see things that you just can't believe you can see through all the fuzziness of it. And it nails focus on, I was nailing focus on bright stars, not just planets. So it's another level better in that starlight mode, but it's kind of ugly and busy while you're working with it. You can turn it back off. You can use it to frame and get focus and then turn it off and have a nice clean view like you're used to looking at. So Nikon's really nailing it with their low light focus technology.
Okay.
All right.
Like I said, lots of Z9 questions, but a bunch of sort of general sort of thoughts about, you know, the people who don't want to spend the money or on a Z9, want to know sort of what's coming back, all that sort of stuff. But I would say the two biggest questions I've seen in the list today are, what's up with this whole banks thing? And actually the 100 to 400, you know, how does it fare against the 70 to 200? How does it, you know, should I be thinking about ditching my 500 PF and going with this? I mean, how does it work with the teleconverters?
It's really interesting.
There's a bunch of sort of interesting questions about that. Since they both came out around the same time, I think that's one of the reasons why we have so many questions about it.
True. And I spent a lot of time with both the Z9 and the 100 to 400 in Mexico. And, you know, I'll say quickly about the banks. The banks is a return to the DSLR system. And I would say that a lot of working pros probably got into using the banks. But a lot of us who like me, I ran around doing a lot of travel, landscape, you know, action type photography. I just always left my DSLR in dynamic area autofocus, AFC, and I used back button focus. And I never did a whole lot of switching around in modes. And I talked to David Archer, and he's like, I never really used my setting banks on my D5 or my D850. And I think most people kind of feel like we didn't use them that much. The cameras were simple. They were much more simple. This camera has a lot of insane features. It's easy to set up, you know, the autofocus is so powerful, but you know, if you watched my video last week, there's a way to kind of set up a hybrid autofocus system where it's partially on the shutter with wide area to capture a quickly erratically moving subject in that wide area and then transfer it to a 3D point that tracks all over the frame. Well, you don't want that all the time bouncing around town doing street photography or landscape photography or whatever you might happen to be. I kind of like the 3D autofocus for that. So it's nice to use these setting banks to kind of set the camera up different ways. And I mean, Stacy, my wife, got after me because she woke up in the middle of the night and I was still like peering through the viewfinder of my camera in bed at 2 o'clock in the morning. She's like, knock this off. And I'm just, you know, I'm still figuring out how to set this whole thing up. I think I have it pretty dialed how I wanted. I talked with David a little bit and got a little more input, but I have 4 modes that I'm basically setting this camera up using those banks. One is just my standard mode where I'm knocking around, I'm photographing my kids, I'm around town, you know, it's just in that kind of basic, I can kind of do everything with mode. Then I have a mode for action that sets up that hybrid autofocus system. Then I have a mode for landscape where it's just kind of dialed for me for landscape. And then I have one for astro because the Z9 has some really cool new astro features that I'm excited to see in a smaller body down the road. I'm excited to see the Z7, you know, successor that comes out with this autofocus system and with some of these landscape shooting and astro shooting features that this camera has. We'll table that for a second. The thing about the banks are they're very different than the user setting mode. The user setting modes, you get the camera set up how you want. You go into the setup menu and you say save user settings and you choose which one and it's locked. And whenever you go back to it, it's right what it was when you said save user settings. The banks are a little bit different. You set those up, say you're in bank A and you make settings changes and things. Well, it's going to remember right where you were when you were last in bank A. Then you go to bank B, you make some changes and stuff, and you go back to bank A, it's right where it was when you left it, when you were in bank A. Whatever you changed, it's going to remember what it last had in bank A. It's just like a placeholder. It's like a bookmark. That's where it is. So, you know, what I'm going to have everyone do, I'm going to go through all the menus in my setup guide, talk about all the new stuff and set up that basic standard settings thing. And then I'm going to have you copy it to bank B, bank C, bank D, and then I'm going to make minute changes that set it up for action, that set it up for landscape, that set it up for astro, and explain why so that you understand those changes. And then you save your menu settings. You just back in that setup menu, you can save everything and back it up to your memory card. So you're going to back it up to your memory card. And then if you go around and you're making changes during the day, at the end of the day, you can just say load settings and boop, you're right back where you set up all your banks. It's going to remember where they all were. And if you make changes that you like, you can save your settings again and lock that in. It's just a little different system. It takes a little getting used to, but I actually think in some ways it's better. And there's also an extended settings button in the shooting menus and the shooting banks that locks in the mode that you're shooting in and the aperture, shutter speed, and ISO settings so that it remembers right where you were when you last left. And I like that. I think that's nice. So, you know, I'll walk you through all that in the setup guide. It'll make more sense. I think it's different than those user settings. And I think some of you are going to like user settings better and some of you are going to like the menu banks better. I have a feeling Charlie Johnson's going to like the menu banks better because some of the things he complained about reverting all the time, like why does it go back to 50th of a second like it was when I locked it in all the darn time? It leaves it where you were last. It's kind of nice that way if you're flipping back and forth. And it was the professional mode. The banks were the professional mode. So I think now that I'm using them, I see why, you know, they're pretty cool.
Yeah.
And with a camera this complex, you're going to want to. It's going to help you. It's going to save time.
Anything to say about the sort of, I've heard you talk about the custom bank versus the shooting banks.
Yeah,
and
that's
stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Nikon doesn't make big changes, and that's kind of a nice thing. You know, it makes it so that each change to a new camera feels familiar. Giant changes are tough on us all with our muscle memory and learning the menus and everything. Nikon puts some things in the shooting menu, you know, the camera. It puts some things in the video shooting menu now that there's video that's such an integrated part of this whole system. And it puts a lot of important things in the custom settings menus. To get the most out of this camera, you're going to need to, there are banks for custom settings separate from banks for shooting. Both the shooting and video are all in one custom bank, even though they're two menus. And the custom settings, the pencil icon, are all in another set of banks. And so what I'm going to do is walk you through all that stuff, and we're going to set up a standard bank for shooting, a standard bank for custom settings. And we'll put those in the I menu so that you can touch the I menu, and we'll label them so that you'll remember them. So that when you're in the I menu, you can bounce through A, B, C, and D and see the label that's standard. That's action. You're going to set both of them to standard, both of them to action, both of them to landscape, both of them to astro, because there's settings in both. And it's kind of unfortunate that you have to set them both, but that's just the way it is. So they're separate. You can't set them both at the same time with a single button press, but putting them in the I menu makes it pretty quick. You'll get good at it.
Okay.
So,
And are there still user settings or are they gone? in the
They're
Z9?
gone.
Okay.
They're gone. I wish they had the option to have both, but they didn't
Yeah.
do that. There's some things that bug me. There's also this multi-frame shooting, but there's a dial where you can choose single frame, low speed continuous, high speed continuous, timer, and then this mode that's multi-frame mode. And then in multi-frame mode, you can go into the menus and you can say, with pushing that button and rolling the command wheel, I can choose all the same things. And I thought to myself, well, maybe they did that because it'll lock into the shooting menu and it'll remember that if I'm in action mode, I want high speed 20 frames a second. But no, it does not. Just like the original Z's, you still have to, you flip into action and then you have to change the dial over from single shot to multi-shot. I have no idea why there's two ways to do everything and yet neither one gets programmed in with the banks. So, there's little things that it's like, come on, Nikon, change this. Just like depth of field preview. And they also, I think they probably had people constantly asking them questions about what does -2 mean in bracketing? What does -3 mean in bracketing? And what is +2 and +3? They didn't realize, that it goes one direction off the meter, which I loved. And I think instead of, explaining it to people or making it an option to have, expanded bracketing in a menu button, they just chose to get rid of it. And they've left us with, if you're doing one stop of exposure bracketing, you can go up to 9 frames going around the meter both ways. Or if you choose to do like I say and use 3 stops of exposure bracketing because of all the dynamic range that these cameras have, you get limited to 3 or 5 frames. That's just all there is, 3 or 5. So kind of a bummer. You might be tossing over exposed frames, but it's not that big a deal. It's electrons, not film.
Yeah.
So I can live with that.
And it's funny, that's one of the things that I've wanted on the Sony system forever is just let me have 2.
Yeah,
no, so,
Nikon just took it away. And I got a feeling it's not coming back in future cameras. So I think they're just tired of answering people's questions about it, and they got rid of exposure delay mode. And yes, there's no shutter and you don't have to worry about the shutter inducing vibration, but you're still pushing the button on a 30-second exposure with the 10-stop neutral density filter. And so you can use the timer mode, but it was really nice that the exposure delay mode gave us 0.2 of a second or a half a second or a second or 2 seconds or 3. Now with the timer mode, you have to go through and change all your timer settings so that it's a single frame and you need to change it. And this quickest option you have is waiting 2 seconds after you push the button. So, I mean, it's going to make me get out my old cable release 10-pin MC30 from the old days and have it in the bag handy because I don't want to wait all that time when I'm shooting a panorama for every frame with a slow shutter speed. If you shoot a 14 frame panorama, you just added 28 seconds of time where you're just sitting around waiting for the shutter to click.
I'm kind of intrigued by David's comment yesterday about using the DX mode. And Mark asks, do you even need a D500?
No.
Do you now have a Z9?
No, my D500 is going to MPB. I'm done with the DSLRs now that this camera's there. It's better at tracking action. It sees little bird's eyes at a distance. It's crazy. And its DX mode has more megapixels than the D500, and it's faster than the D500. So there's just no reason for me to carry the D500 around with this. So,
all right. Another thing that's sort of been coming up is I think you surprised a bunch of people talking about going back to shutter button focus.
Yeah.
And that sort of seems to be a change from sort of the general, you get your new camera, you automatically get back button focus going, you turn the.
Well, Arthur Morris and some other, extreme bird photographers, some of the best bird photographers in the world that have shot with, whether Canon or Nikon, the group area mode. I know Nikon, the group area mode where you have kind of a wide pattern of points, in Nikon, the group 9 is one big favorite at the DSLR age of shooting birds, where you get 9 autofocus points in a diamond that you can move around the frame and pick up a bird and then it'll pass it off. And a lot of those guys believed in shutter in the shutter activated autofocus just for erratic, fast moving birds in flight because it's quicker. You see that bird, you put it in the diamond, you hit the button and you're locked on it and shooting. You just don't take your finger off while you've got it in focus. And I think, that was a really cool mode. I didn't really need it on the shutter button. I still used the group with the back button because I'm so used to back button. But the thing with the Z9 is, and I'll credit Tom Hogan's the first person that I read talking a little bit about this. He didn't explain exactly how to do it, but he was talking about this hybrid 3D wide area mode. And I started thinking about it. And if you wire the shutter to just be wide area, and then they have this cool, you can reprogram the buttons in the controls section of the custom settings menu. And you can tell the AF on button that it's not only hitting AF on, but it's selecting an area mode. And then you can make the autofocus point, there's a word for it. It's sticky. I mean, I'm going to say sticky. That's not the word they use in the menus, but I'll show you how that all works. I did in the video the other day. It's like a persistent. And so the minute you pick up a point with your shutter button inside that wide area, and it's the bird that you want, or the person's eye that you want, or whatever it is, and then you hit that back button focus with your thumb back there, it'll pick up the point that's already selected, and all of a sudden wide area is gone and it moves all over the frame with the point you picked up. So it's kind of a more advanced version of that group area autofocus that has eye and face and torso detect and animal. It's amazing. It's really, really brilliant. So, and it's very intuitive. Once you play with that mode, you'll see it doesn't take time. You saw what my friend Jasmine was doing.
Mhm.
I spent about 5 minutes talking to her before I launched and went out kiteboarding, and she's nailing all of her shots. Everything was in focus. So it doesn't take long to learn. And her only other camera is a Canon 5D Mark II. So, it's not hard.
Yeah.
It's easy.
Z9 is a landscape camera,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the Z7 II or the Z6 II. We're getting a bunch of people who, so, they understand that it's a great action camera. How is it as a landscape camera so far?
It has features that I want in my landscape camera, like particularly it has the night shooting stuff that I want in a landscape camera. It has this mode where everything's red. Even the images that you shoot are red. You can check focus on them. I mean, you can choose whether the images are the normal colors, but all your controls and menus and everything are in red, so you don't burn out your night vision just changing menu settings. That's awesome. To me, it's just big. It's big. It's cumbersome, particularly with an L bracket, which I really want on a landscape camera. And a lot of times in the landscape, I'm hiking a lot of gear a long ways, and I'd rather be carrying glass than an extra vertical grip I don't need for landscape. So, to me, the dream landscape camera is this size down, not necessarily having 8K video and, 14-bit ProRes recording. I think that this camera is so big largely to keep up with the video specs that Sony and Canon have without the overheating issues that those cameras have. They were able to put cooling fans in it and a lot of architecture to really do some stupendous video. So it's an amazing action camera. I'm still kind of working on what I want to do with it regarding an L bracket. And there are absolutely times where I'm going to grab my smaller Z body to carry up to Delicate Arch along with a spare tripod. And I just don't want to carry all that weight. And there's times, the other day I was just talking to somebody, I was skiing with the family, with my little kids, and I'm grabbing the Z50 with the 50 to 250, because look at this thing compared to this thing. If I'm toting kids and kids gear and skis and everything else, I'd rather, this little guy is an amazing little pocket camera. So, it's big, it's expensive, it's heavy. That's my problems with it as a landscape camera, but it's a very capable landscape camera. And, I think that if you do the fine, engineering mind pixel peeping, you go look at Photos to Photon's website where they test all the sensor stuff. The Z7 II sensor has a tiny bit more dynamic range. It has a tiny bit better noise performance than the Z9, but in practice out in the field, I'm not seeing much of a difference. They're both phenomenal. And that's where it kind of, the rubber meets the road, is that I shot sunrises and sunsets and a little star stuff and it's amazing. It's a great camera.
So that we did have one question, just sort of asking about Z9 noise levels and working in Lightroom. And it appears that at least up until now, that Adobe doesn't quite have the final dialed in profiles for.
No, you're not looking at what the files are going to look like in the long run yet. You know, if you think about it, remember, I mean, for those people who bought cameras dating way back, you know, I remember getting my 810 and my 850 and my 500, and you get them and you're shooting JPEGs, and then, you know, weeks after you get them, Adobe Raw Converter will let you do the DNG conversion and then import DNG file conversions into Lightroom. But otherwise, Lightroom couldn't see the files at all. I remember with the Z7, we waited maybe 6-8 weeks or something before we got.
It was quite a while.
It was a long time. And I think Adobe made the right choice here. And they said, well, you guys can have a look at our early kind of half-baked profile for this camera. And it isn't what it's going to be. You know, there's going to be, you're going to log into Creative Cloud at some point, and there's going to be an update that has new camera profiles. And all of a sudden your Z9 files are going to look a lot nicer, your raw files. So I'm not talking about that yet. I don't think we're there yet. I think we have to sort of wait and see. You know, people are using Nikon Capture NX or whatever. I don't remember what they're calling that software right now. I just can't use that. I mean, and plus, you know, I hear people complaining that applies over aggressive noise reduction. And it's so, you know, I'm going to see what Adobe does in the long run. The files look pretty good to me, to be honest. I mean, for a 46 megapixel camera, I'm not complaining. I think they're going to look better, but with a little noise reduction, they look pretty good. So for 46 megapixels.
All right. Couple more Z9 questions. Any negatives using f-mount lenses with Z9 and wildlife and landscape photography?
Yeah, I took flack for saying I had no problem working with f-mount lenses on the FTZ. I still say that. I think that they perform great. You know, if you're shooting video, and they have kind of a stepped little motor where you'll see kind of jerky motion when it's focusing in video. But I mean, performance wise, I've shot so much with my 500 PF on my Z cameras. I shot for a long time with the 70-200 before I got my hands on the new just dream machine of a 70-200 they made for the Z camera. The biggest thing I'm going to say is that, you know, if you've got money in the bank account, you better lock it up the minute you start testing these new lenses for the Z system, because the 14-30 f4 lens is a better lens overall than the old 14-24 that I loved and lugged all over the world for a decade and a half and called my favorite lens. The new lightweight little 14-30 is sharper across the spectrum. And the new 14-24 is a dream ultra wide. It is so sharp in the corners. You know, when I compared it to the old one, it's like, oh my gosh. And they got rid of all the focus breathing that happened. It made it hard to do focus stacking with that wide angle lens. It's amazing. And the 70-200 is probably the best 70-200 ever made. It's just incredible. It's so sharp. I was doing some tests, you know, I was skeptical of the 2.0 teleconverter on that lens. And I ran some tests, and I'm not there yet. I'm not willing to give my final talk about the 100-400 versus the 70-200 with the 2.0 teleconverter. But now that I'm pixel peeping in on the images, I'm not getting rid of that 70-200. It's ripping sharp with the 2.0 teleconverter on it.
Yeah.
It's ripping sharp.
It was pretty crazy.
It's pretty crazy.
So before we jump to lenses, which and some other Z stuff, one of the big questions that we got, and it's something that I've grappled with when I got the A1, which is all of a sudden you can shoot at 10, 15, 20, 30 frames a second. And, you know, you hold that shutter button down and all of a sudden you come back with 1,000 images. And, you know,
the thing I didn't say in that video is I gave Jasmine that camera for like an hour and a half while I was out kite foiling. And I came back and she had shot 1,980 frames.
And say what she said to you about going through images.
She's like, "Oh, Hudson, can I go through the images that I shot with you on the computer?" I was like, "Yeah, we need to set some time aside." And I was like, "Because you shot like almost 2,000," and she goes like, "Why don't you pick out the best ones and I'll just look at those with you?" was like, you don't want to go through them all? And she's like, I trust you. So I was up all like going through culling, and yeah, I culled it down to like 90, and she loved them.
Yeah.
So,
But this is a big thing. I mean, you're going to start shooting, with these cameras. I mean, one of the things that I've learned with the A1 is I never go up in, I haven't been in a situation where I really need 30 frames a second or 20 frames a second even.
yeah.
10 frames a second is enough for me.
Yeah, somebody asked me, how is the 120 frame per second 11 megapixel mode? How does that work? And I was like, I have not acted. I'm like, I mean, first of all, 20 years or 15 years ago, 18 years ago, 11 megapixels was fine. It's a pretty small file now. I would feel that that's a pretty small file. And I don't need 120 frames a second, and I don't want to go through 120 frames to find the best one that happened in that second. And I think, I mean, maybe there's applications, right? If you're photographing a water droplet hitting a surface with constant light behind it, or you're photographing, trying to get a bullet blasting the apple to pieces, and you just, have somebody fire the gun while you're holding the shutter button down. Yeah, okay, sure. I'm sure you can probably do some cool stuff like that. That's what it's for. But that's not the kind of photography I do a lot of. I think it's great that it has that capability, and it's, it's a bragging right of Nikon's. I was shooting a fair bit in the 20 frame per second, and I quickly switched because I started realizing that I don't have time to cull through all these images. I got to where that's one thing where I think the multi-frame button's nice, because you can be shooting and suddenly you realize, this kid Christopher is getting ready to throw one of these crazy tricks that he does on his wingboard, and so you can hit that 4 kings key on the top left side of the camera and flick a command dial in the back, and suddenly be at 20 frames a second instead of 10. You can keep those two like on the clicker button, and you're shooting twice as many frames, and you get that perfect moment where he's upside down and the spray is coming off of him. I mean, those are for those moments. For those moments, 20 frames a second is cool, because you literally have 6 good ones to choose from instead of 1. And but for the most part, I shoot I keep the low speed one at 10 and the high speed one at 20, and I live in the low speed one in single frame.
Yeah, I would say I learned this exact same thing last summer when we did that action shoot. That there are times when you want to go into that high speed frame mode, but
the Eagles look like they're about to get into a fight. Hit that button, flip to 20 frames a second.
Yeah.
The rest of the time, 10's fine.
It is going to wreak havoc with your storage, though, if you start shooting that way, even at 10.
And you need to cull.
Yeah.
You're going to need to cull, and you need to be a little more ruthless about it.
Yeah.
These are big files.
Yeah.
And we had some people asking about SSD storage versus spinning drive storage, and I'm an advocate of using, as everyone knows, those Samsung T7 drives, which I owe you. You were the one who originally turned me on to how great the Samsung drives were. I like having some 2 terabyte ones of those laying around to put my files on. I have an extra 2 terabyte drive in this Dell laptop, aside from my system drive, that's uber fast. It's one of those M.2 NVMe drives. It's like 3 gigabytes a second. And so I try to edit either off that really fast internal drive on my laptop out on the road, or off one of those fast, SSD drives, the Samsung T7s. Those go up to like 700 megabytes a second. And I'll be keeping what I'm editing and culling through on those very fast drives, and have my Lightroom catalog on a really fast drive. And then when I'm done with it and I've pretty much got it culled and edited, then I move it over to my Drobo, which is a slow old spinning drive, and it's fine for accessing and maybe editing a photo here and there and exporting something. But yeah, you're going to have to get kind of, and you make sure you're backing everything that you're working with photos up.
Yeah.
Everything's in 2 locations. I back up to old spinning drives. I have a big 4 terabyte G drive that I take with me on the road, and I back everything up to that. I don't need the backup to be fast. So,
and we're working on an organizing course that sort of talks about all of this stuff.
Yep.
But I will say, just, a year with the A1, my T7 got full very quickly. I had to move off 2 years worth of 2 previous years worth of photographs.
Oh yeah.
To sort of keep that drive.
I mostly filled a 2 terabyte drive just in Yellowstone, the Tetons, and Moab in last fall's workshops.
Yep, I know.
And that wasn't with the Z9. That was with the Z7.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Let's stick with sort of cameras for a while. There've been a bunch of sort of questions, you've talked at length about how much you love the Z9, but what you really want is that sort of mythical Z8 that's got all of the, or Z7 III or whatever Nikon will ultimately call it.
I'd like it to be this big.
Yeah. Gotten questions from people who are like, I don't need a Z9. I don't want to spend the money. I don't want it to be that big. What should I do? Should I go, I mean, Nikon's still selling Z6s and Z7s, not the ones and the twos.
I mean, the original.
Yeah. And it's like, right now, what do I do? Do I hang around and wait, until we see something else? Do I,
if you need a camera right now, there's everybody's making amazing cameras. If you're a DSLR shooter and you pick up a Z6 II or a Z7 II and really spend a month shooting it, you're going to have a hard time going back to your DSLR. It's a great camera. If you pick up a Sony A7R III, you're going to love it. You don't need the 460 some megapixels. You don't need the A1's video power. A lot of the Z9 and the A3 and the A1, or Canon and Sony are a little confusing that they're both A's. Or no, it's R3. Sorry, R3 and A1. It's video. And it's that 8K video that I am going to argue less than 1% of 1% of video shooters actually need to be shooting. You're thinking about 8K. I mean, you got to have the fastest computers on earth and more storage than you can imagine to be working with 8K video. And you're not going to notice it unless you're sitting in the front 20 rows in a freaking, IMAX theater. It's going to look great. 4K looks great even on your 8K TV. So I can't see myself using the 8K features in this camera. So do you really need 30 frames a second full res JPEG and 20 frames a second full res RAW? I'm going to argue most people don't. Some people, sure.
Yeah.
David Archer's he's an amazing wildlife photographer, and National Geographic working photographers out in the field, and people who make a living shooting sports for the AP and Sports Illustrated on the sidelines. They're going to love it. And they also, are going to drive there in their SUV, and they're going to take their big monopod out and have it resting on that with their big lenses. And, I think most people will be more than happy if they spend a little time working with the mid-tier cameras from any of the brands.
Yes.
The Canon R6, the Sony A7 IV or A7 III, even the Nikon Z6, Z6 II, they're all great. I think the Z6 II has some advantages if you were buying right now over just the standard Z6, and the Z7 II has some standard advantages that probably make it worth it if you have the money, just because they have dual processors, a little bit better autofocus, a simpler system for choosing what autofocus mode you're in, and also a much deeper buffer that you don't run out of frames when you're shooting something action oriented as fast.
I would say if you're going to keep, if you're the type of person who buys a camera every 5 or 6 years, I would definitely go with the Z6 or Z7 II over the originals.
Yeah.
There's a $500 price difference with the Z7 and the Z7 II, but it's only a couple $100 the Z6 and the Z6 II.
It's a no-brainer.
And I have to say that the Z6, I've got 1-year-old Z6s, and it is just a wonderful camera.
It is.
It's a really wonderful camera.
It's a great camera. I think that 24 megapixel area is a sweet spot for an everyday camera.
Yeah.
It really is. And this camera is, the tech from it's going to bleed down. I personally think Nikon has probably gotten a lot of the profits that they expect from pre-orders for this camera. And sure, everybody like me talking about how great it is with autofocus tracking and stuff, people are going to reach up for it that were kind of on the fence, and they'll take a while to get all the orders fulfilled. But the amount of people who want a camera this big and expensive is limited.
Yeah.
And so they really do need to get this tech down into an exciting new series of bodies that, have that same kind of autofocus power and some of the new features in this camera and the stacked sensor and the no shutter, and get people excited and sell cheaper cameras that are lighter and smaller and a little more versatile for people like me that like to go on big adventures where they're packing their home with them on their back along with their camera. I think it'll be coming, but I wouldn't expect it before the holiday season this year, and maybe not
Yeah.
even by then.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think the camera companies too are hurting from the chip shortages, and
Yeah.
they're trying to reallocate as best they can.
right.
I mean, Sony, you can't actually get their sort of entry level
Yeah.
alpha cameras right now
Right.
because they're focused on sort of the higher end stuff in the new A7
I mean,
IV.
look at the car companies,
Yeah.
Stacy and I have a 2020 Subaru Outback, and it's every week the dealers around town are begging us to
Mhm.
to trade it in because they have so much demand for used cars right now.
Yeah. So Z50,
It's one of my favorite cameras I've ever owned.
where do you see that going?
I hope and dream that they build, the Z60 or whatever they call it, that has this autofocus system and a really good, 20 to 30 megapixel sensor that has some speed and buffer that uses this autofocus technology. Because I think this camera is amazing, and people complain, it doesn't have vibration reduction or image stabilization, but the lenses that they built for it, I mean, this is a 50 to 250, and it just blows my mind how good this little lens is. It's tiny and it's packable, and I love the images out of it. I spent, part of the reason I think why the Z9 felt so giant to me was I went on my family trip down kiteboarding with the family and did Christmas in Mexico in Baja, and all I took was this Z50 and the 50 to 250 and the 16 to 50. I had this little tiny kit that fit in a little bag on my side, and it covered everything from an equivalent of 24 to 375.
Mhm.
And it's fast and it's fun and it's easy to use and it's light and fits in the palm of your hand. And then I got the Z9. I'm like, holy crap, the body weighs more than the entire kit I've been carrying around without a lens on it. What's up with this? And it's a great camera, but my favorite time as a DSLR shooter was when the D500 came out and the D850 came out, and I had this just amazing APS-C DSLR that had a deep buffer and fast frame rate at 10 frames a second. And it shot, 20.9
Yeah.
megapixels, plenty for action type wildlife sports. And then I had the landscape dream camera with the 850 that was a bit noisy when it got up in its ISO, but just an epic landscape camera down in its lower ISO range. Lots of juicy megapixels at 46 megapixels, and every setting I could dream of. And both of them have backlit buttons and were easy to operate in the dark. And it was like one felt like the other, and I could switch the lenses in between and get half again as much reach with my long lenses on the APS-C, and then step up to the full frame for wide angle stuff and landscape. And it was the 2-camera dream kit. I'm hoping that something like that comes out to replace the Z50. It may not be quite as pro level as the D500. Maybe they'll get there. I hope so. I would love to have, something like a successor to the Z7 that has this autofocus technology built in, does 14 frames a second and great 4K 10-bit internal video. And then an APS-C camera with the same autofocus technology that's got a great 24 megapixel sensor. That'd be my 2-camera kit I would dream of.
That's the Z50 is the sort of dream camera for me that I would love to see Sony come up with. They've just been focusing on the A6000 series.
Yeah.
And it's just not there. It's just, I mean, I
never been that
want a
fun.
bigger body. I want a little bit better autofocus.
Viewfinder.
Yeah.
Viewfinder. Yeah.
So one of the things I've heard you talking about lately, and I had one other friend who bought this lens and loved it, is the new 24 to 120.
Yeah. It's on my Z9 right now. It's a great little lens.
So we've been talking about how great the 24 to 70 f4, the original Z 24 to 70 zoom.
Mhm.
If you were buying right now, would you buy that one instead?
I have not. I'm not quite ready to talk about that yet, because what I need to do is I need to get a boring brick wall.
Yes, you do.
And I need to shoot both of them through their aperture range at 24, 50, 70, and then shoot the 120. But I will say that I shot this a fair bit, when I wasn't shooting sports and action down in Mexico. I was in this wonderful little mining town, El Triunfo. It's like from the 17th century. They discovered silver there, and it's got all this old silver mining stuff, and it's beautiful and all getting revamped. And I shot a lot of stuff with just my friends hanging around there, and old architecture and stucco. And I loved the images out of this. And I shot into a sunrise. You saw those pictures I took.
Yep.
Right into the sun, with rays coming up out of it as it's pretty much fully exposed over the edge of the ocean and the peninsula out there where I was in Baja. And it didn't ghost or flare, and it did a beautiful job both at 24 and at 120. So my initial reactions are there's nothing at all disappointing in the images, wide open, edge of frame, everything. I mean, I kind of think that my answer is going to probably be that you should seriously consider the 24 to 120 to be your amazing lens. And I think there's a great travel kit to be had with the 24 to 120 and the 100 to 400. It fits in the same spot as a 70 to 200 in your bag and gives you a huge amount of versatility. Maybe you throw the 14 to 24 in if you want ultra wide ability, or the 14 to 30 if you have the little guy for your lightweight kit. But I will say, I came back from Mexico. It's interesting. We have a lot of questions about the 100 to 400. And to be honest with you, I need to go back and retest some stuff, because I shot almost exclusively with this lens down in Mexico, because I'm shooting birds in flight, and I'm shooting kite surfers and wing surfers and hydrofoilers. And it was wonderful. And I was not disappointed in the image quality from it at all. I was like, wow, this is an amazing lens. Maybe I'll sell my 500 PF and get the 1.4 teleconverter because it works great with the 1.4. And maybe I'll even sell my 70 to 200. When am I going to carry my 70 to 200 when I wouldn't choose to grab this instead because of its reach? And then I went out to my mom's farm last week, and I had Charlie Johnson, who just disappeared from view here, but I see his kitchen. There he is. He loaned me his 1.4 and 2.0 teleconverter, which I took to Mexico, and he was coming over. He was here yesterday to do a couple things, and I gave him back his teleconverters. But I took him to my mom's farm, and I shot my 70 to 200 and my 100 to 400 and my 500 PF at this old barn door of my mom's. And the results just really surprised me. I was just looking at them yesterday with Rick, and it makes me want to do a complete autofocus calibration on this thing and take it back out to my kid's school in a brick wall and kind of reshoot everything. Because I think some of it is just that the 70 to 200 is a ludicrously sharp lens. I think it's just insanely sharp, because honestly, the photos with the 2.0 teleconverter on this 70 to 200 were sharper than the 100 to 400 with no teleconverter on it. That's what I was seeing. And I was doing pinpoint autofocus, hitting the autofocus every single shot, getting a green box. And you don't tend to need to calibrate these mirrorless lenses very much. So I'm going to keep testing, because I'm not willing to go fully public with those results yet. But the thing of it is, right? I mean, you're at 46 megapixels. You're going to be testing your lens's capability. Yeah. You're not going to notice this on a 24 megapixel camera. And nothing disappointed me in all the images that I took. We were going through some of the shots I took of birds and some of the shots I took of kite. Nothing looks soft. Nothing looks out of focus. It just suffers by way of comparison with that 70 to 200. And funny thing, the 500 PF and this are about on par. Then I love the 500 PF. I love that lens, and I find it razor sharp. It's just not as razor sharp as the 70 to 200S. The 70 to 200S may just be one of those unicorn magical special lenses. It's insane. But what blew my mind was that even through the 2.0 teleconverter, it's ludicrously sharp.
Yeah. But then again, you get a maximum 400 with that lens.
Yeah.
Whereas you put the teleconverter on the 100, 400, or the 500 PF, and you get much more reach.
But even a little slightly bit less sharp. Yes. So
did you notice any sort of issues with the 2.0 teleconverter in terms of focus speed or any of that sort of stuff?
No, on the 100 to 400, yes, in lower light. In really bright situations, it's great, and the images look phenomenal. But you're getting up into higher ISO because you're suddenly at f11 and you zoom out. And that's your minimum or your maximum aperture is like f11 zoomed out with this lens with a 2.0 teleconverter on it. And in lower light situations, that fact itself starts slowing down the autofocus system, and it starts hunting and having problems.
Well,
So-
once you put a teleconverter on it, it's going to make it even.
well,
more
that's
so.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It
right,
does. It
yeah.
doesn't have, this lens doesn't have that problem. You know, this lens, it goes 4.5 to 5.6 very slowly. I mean, it's like at every marker, it moves a third of a stop. And, you know, it's only in the very last little bit that it goes all the way to 5.6. You're at 5.3 and then 5. It's a gradual move out to 5.6, but it's the same maximum aperture as the 500 PF out at 400. It's 100 millimeters shorter lens, but you know, it's a very similar thing to work with. But then you get to rack it all the way back to 100 and get things that are close up to you. So it's really handy to work with. And the fact that its image quality is very similar to the 500 PF, which is great. I'm probably going to get rid of my 500 PF and keep this guy instead and buy a 1.4 teleconverter because it works great on that, even in lower light situations in my testing. And the image quality doesn't seem to degrade. It didn't really seem to degrade much with the 2.0 teleconverter either. Really, it just, you know, it just isn't quite as good out of the box as the 70 to 200 2.8. And some of that might just be the 70 to 200 2.8, like I said.
Yeah. Okay. So 100 to 400, we'll have more.
Yeah, there'll be
soon.
more. But I do love it. I really,
Yeah.
I love it. I'm not getting rid of it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to start comparing, you know, those types of lenses and when you're pixel peeping at that level.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
I saw the images that you and Jasmine shot
Yeah.
in Baja,
Yeah.
and those images were sharp as they needed to be.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, the other thing I did was I backed up and I took some shots of my wife Stacy, like just at 200 millimeters with the 100 to 400 wide open at, you know, f4.5 or whatever that is, or f5 maybe, and with the 70 to 200 wide open at 2.8, and then backed up a football field away with the 500 and shot pretty much the same frame with the 500. And my favorite images were by far the 70 to 200 2.8, just because its bokeh is so beautiful. It's blurred out of focus background.
Yeah.
Now the 500 was too, but you can't work with a model where you need a walkie-talkie to tell them what to do because you're so far away. So.
All right. Let's see here. How are you using the function buttons on these lenses?
You know, what I am doing is the ability to change autofocus mode and area mode for the one that's out, for the one that's in close if you have two. And I put that on the front of the camera too. It's just really handy. And then the play button, which that's just something I've been used to. It's my muscle memory for a while. I'm still thinking that through a little bit before I do my setup video. I'm not 100% on that, but that's what I've done for a while and I'm really used to it. It's nice to just be able to tap the button and hit play.
Yeah, I
while
did
you're-
the same on my Sony lenses.
Yeah.
Even though the play button on the Sony is pretty easy to get to, it's just, you know, when you're holding that lens like that, it's just so easy to just hit that button.
So easy to hit that button. Yeah.
What are you liking right now for the Z primes?
Ugh, I haven't tested a Z lens I didn't like. Right now, you're looking at us through that little retro styled 28 2.8, which I just adore. I think that's the screaming deal of the Z lens lineup right now. It's small, it's light, it's sharp. It's a great focal length, both on APS-C and full frame. I'm shooting this right now through the Z6 II, through that 28 2.8 and the crop mode and the DX mode. So it becomes like a, 14 plus 28, 32, 42. So it's a little in between 35 and 50. I love the 51.8. That's one of my favorite lenses I've ever had. I did a video recently on YouTube that was showing some images and it had this photo of our good friend Tobey and in Yellowstone out at Swan Lake getting ready for Milky Way shooting. And I took this image of her in really beautiful, just post sunset light. And someone said, what wide angle lens is that? The bokeh is just amazing. And I said, no, that's the 51.8. It's just a beautiful, beautiful lens. It's out of focus detail rendering is wonderful and it's sharp edge to edge, wide open. The 21.8 may be the best star lens I've ever owned. I mean, the 14 to 24 is great too, but it's just an insane lens for star work, and you put it on a tracker like the Move Shoot Move, and it's just mind bending how good that lens is.
And Sony's been just as good
With its
in those primes. That 14-1.8 and the 20-1.8 is the screaming deal.
The 14-1.8 makes me jealous.
Yeah.
I hope Nikon follows their lead on that one, because it's small, it's light,
Yeah.
and it's beautiful. It's so cool.
Let's see here. I think we've got enough lens questions.
Oh, and the 105 macro is
The sushi
again,
lens.
As Jerry calls it, the sushi lens. The 105 macro is also in that special, ludicrously sharp realm with the 51.8, the 21.8, and this 70-200. It's so ludicrously sharp. Now, using it as an all-purpose lens, they sort of screwed up one thing. They have a limiter on it, and you would hope that they would limit it to be like 1.5 feet to infinity, and then all focus. Instead, they went from like 1.5 feet to close up, and then all focus distances.
Yeah.
So when you're trying to photograph somebody and it misses them for focus, it racks all the way back in through the macro range, and it takes forever to rack back out. So it's really slow focusing unless you just manually focus and help it. So it's the one bummer with it, but man, is it sharp and wonderful. It's a wonderful 105. It's the sharpest 105 I've ever tested. So it's a great lens, just not necessarily your action lens.
Yes. All right. Most of the Nikon questions, I think, maybe spend the last few minutes. We had a couple of questions about sort of cold weather gear and shooting at night, basically shooting the Milky Way at night, and sort of the things you need to think about when you're shooting in cold weather. Since we've got our next office hours is going to have a little gallery of winter photography, this is probably a good way to end things.
I did a video maybe 3 weeks ago with gloves for cold weather photography, a kind of a glove system. And I think that if you check that video out, if you haven't seen it, it's in my YouTube channel in the Approaching the Scene playlist. It's, gloves for cold weather photography, and maybe packing my Z9 or something. It's kind of my approach to cold weather gear from years of mountaineering has kind of taught me about taking care of myself in cold weather. And I've done some pretty, some first ascents in the Alaska range and Denali and the Andes down in Peru, some big mountains. And the idea of layers are everything. Nothing cotton that absorbs perspiration and gets wet. You want something that wicks it away from your body and evaporates it into the atmosphere. High performance garments. I think the best manufacturers out there are, from my perspective, are Patagonia, Arc'teryx, and Outdoor Research. And Outdoor Research makes gloves and gaiters, protection for your feet and hands like nobody else. They're a Seattle-based company, originally founded by a brain surgeon who got way into mountaineering and felt there wasn't adequate protection for hands and feet, which were the first things to freeze. And he invented this system that's amazing, and long story, but it's a cool setup. And having a liner that you can pull out that's touch sensitive to use with your camera, that's light enough that you can keep using with your camera. Your hands are going to get cold and extreme cold, but at least they're not bare skin. They pull right out of the glove. And then having like a down mitt that goes over that, and then having a shell that you can put over the whole thing, or just over the little glove liners if it's raining and not that cold. That's a three-way system. And I do the same thing with my body. I have a good base layer that wicks moisture out, some mid puffy light layer, whether it's synthetic or down, but light and fluffy and warm, and then a waterproof shell, and boots that are comfortable and water resistant. And if you're really out in cold, something like Sorels is a wonderful thing to add to your arsenal. Or Muck boots. Muck has some really nice, completely waterproof, very warm rubber boots that you can wade into streams with, that have good Vibram soles like a hiking boot and are actually comfortable to walk around in. When it rains, I wear my Muck boots to walk my kid up to school and back. It's just great. And that's thanks again to Charlie Johnson, who's peeking at us in there from his kitchen.
Lens warmer.
Lens warmer. I have my favorite current one linked. If you go to my website, the hudsonharney.com/ATS links, all the gear that I use is linked there, my current favorite stuff. And under, I think, lighting and night shooting, there's a lens warmer in there that has a 3-position setting, low, medium, and high. It's a really nice one. It's kind of wide, wraps around. A lens warmer is a great thing if you're in some place that's just got, even if it's not that cold, but there's a lot of moisture and humidity. As the night changes to day and the day changes to night, when you want to be out there working, a lot of times your lenses fog up, and having that warmer on there will keep that from happening. And our cameras now are USB-C powered. I love that. That's one thing. When I ordered the Z9, I ordered a spare battery day one, first thing in the morning when I ordered this thing, and it's still, I get the thing saying, we're still waiting on your battery. But I charge this thing by I don't even use the charger that came with it. I just plug the camera into USB-C, a power delivery capable USB-C charger like my phone. And you can also power the camera from a power delivery capable battery pack. I have those linked on my site. Anker makes a really nice one that's very small, and it equals about 6 of these batteries. You can run it all night for a week backpacking trip off this thing without ever losing juice. When you're not using it, you plug it in your camera bag. You don't really need spare batteries anymore, especially when they're like $235 a battery, when the Anker thing is like $65 and equals 6 of them.
I'm the same way with the Sony batteries.
Yeah. So, the fact that you can have this little battery bank that I have linked on my site, it has a USB-C power delivery port that can run your camera while you're doing the Milky Way shooting, and then a spare blank that you can just plug your lens warmer into and run them both off the same battery that's hanging in your stone bag on your tripod. You're set. That's my advice for cold weather stuff, is keep your feet and your hands warm and dress in layers, and get rid of it. Don't be wearing jeans and cotton t-shirts, get yourself a good quality base layer from, and I love Patagonia. If you search Patagonia, you can find stuff at the end of the season. Like in the spring, they sell their winter stuff for 50% off. It might be bright colors or something, but they're such a cool, socially responsible company that takes good care of their employees. I like to support them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Look for cold weather stuff in
Spring,
April, May.
Look for your board shorts in the fall.
All right. Well, here we go.
All right, everybody.
Another.
Well, and remember, office hours. We're going to do one more before we take off on the winter workshops in Death Valley and Joshua Tree with a gang of fun photographers. So we'll do it on the 15th, day after Valentine's Day. Send in your favorite winter image. And we'll go through them. We'll talk about winter. And it'll be fun to see everybody's pictures. And thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks so much to Rick and Woody and Darren for being along for the ride. Thanks, Charlie, for loaning me that gear that I used to get into a huge conundrum about lenses that I'm going to have to keep sorting through in my brain. And thanks to everybody for listening for this whole hour to us all. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Take care.
Ciao, everybody.